WWE had a chance to give Randy Orton the most meaningful win of his entire career at Backlash 2025, but instead, they buried him in his own hometown, sacrificed his legacy for a broken narrative, and exposed just how little they value the man who has been the backbone of their company for over 2 decades. What unfolded between Orton and John Cena in St. Louis wasn't just another chapter in their legendary rivalry, it was a final nail in the coffin for anyone who still believed Randy Orton was going to get the redemption he deserved after his long injury layoff and triumphant return. The outcome of that match proved that nostalgia is a double-edged sword in WWE, and Orton was on the wrong end of it. For months, fans speculated whether Randy Orton's return would be the ultimate redemption arc, culminating in one last world title run before he finally calls it quits. His return at Survivor Series 2023 was met with thunderous applause. The fans were ready. The company teased a run that would reflect his status as one of the most consistent and reliable performers of the modern era. Instead, he was slowly shuffled down the card, tossed into forgettable tag matches, and stripped of any creative purpose. The Backlash match against Cena was supposed to be his crowning moment, a full circle story in his hometown against his greatest rival. WWE didn't just have the blueprint for a career-defining win for Orton, they had the emotional context, the fan investment, and the narrative depth, but they chose to feed Orton to a version of John Cena that's more about headlines and short-term attention than actual wrestling storytelling. Orton didn't just lose. He lost in a match that was scripted to make him look like a prop in Cena's farewell tour. It was a match dressed up with nostalgia, callbacks, and finishers that should have been dramatic, but there was no weight behind them because the story didn't care about Orton's journey. It only cared about Cena's exit. The most unforgivable part of the entire ordeal is how WWE framed the match as the end of an era for both men, only to remind us that Cena's the one writing his own ending, while Orton is being written off as someone who exists solely to elevate someone else's legacy. Orton deserved to win, not because he needed the title, but because he needed validation. After everything he gave the company, after enduring spinal fusion surgery, after rebuilding his body, and stepping back into the ring with purpose, he was once again made to play second fiddle to the corporate machine's favorite son. There was a time when Randy Orton was the most dangerous man in the company. When his music hit, you knew someone was getting hurt. When he looked into the camera, you saw malice and precision. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but he was surgical in his brutality. He was the Viper. Now in WWE's current ecosystem, he's a legacy act trotted out when they need to pad the main event or give someone credibility. They no longer know what to do with someone like Orton because he doesn't fit the influencer-driven, merchandise-first aesthetic of the modern product. WWE didn't just ruin Orton at Backlash. They've been ruining him for years through a slow erosion of everything that made him Randy Orton. The loss to Cena in his hometown wasn't just bad booking, it was a betrayal. The match layout itself said everything. Cena kicked out of 2 RKOs. Orton didn't even get to attempt a punt. The pacing was slow and methodical, but it didn't build to Orton's benefit. It dragged so Cena could catch his breath, control the tempo, and ultimately deliver an attitude adjustment through a table for the finish. There was no creative storytelling, no visual that will be remembered as iconic for Orton's side. The most talked about post-match moment wasn't even about Orton. It was Cena giving an attitude adjustment to R-Truth in what seemed like an out-of-character heel tease. That moment dominated post-show discussions and completely eclipsed Orton's role in what should have been his match. Think about that. In his own city, against his greatest rival, Orton was overshadowed by R-Truth. That is WWE's booking philosophy in 2025. That is what they've reduced Randy Orton to. But because he wasn't a loud promo, because he didn't chase the spotlight outside the ring, and because he didn't conform to the image of what WWE now considers bankable, he was slowly phased out. Not retired, just minimized, diminished. There was no ceremony, no transition, just a long, subtle decline masked by occasional title matches that never meant anything. Cena, by contrast, is granted a full-blown farewell world tour. His story is treated like a once-in-a-generation epic. Orton's is being quietly erased while he's still active. It's not just what happened at Backlash, it's what didn't happen in the months leading up to it. Orton was never given a real build toward the title. He was thrown into the Cena match with minimal fanfare because the story didn't need him to be important. It only needed him to be familiar, to be recognizable, to be a body. This isn't how you treat a 2-time Royal Rumble winner. This isn't how you book someone who carried the company during multiple transitions. From the Ruthless Aggression era to the PG era, from the Authority to the modern TKO era. If anything, Orton's ability to adapt should have made him the centerpiece of this phase of WWE, but in reality, the company doesn't reward adaptability unless it comes with social media numbers and celebrity interviews. Orton never chased outside fame. He chased ring psychology, slow burns, and character depth. WWE doesn't reward that anymore. Even the crowd in St. Louis felt muted by the end of the match. They were deflated, not by the result itself, but by the energy. Orton didn't look devastated after the loss. He looked resigned. That's the worst thing a performer of his caliber can project. He wasn't defeated. He was done. And it's not because he wants to retire. It's because the company has made it clear that his value lies in nostalgia, not progression. If Randy Orton had won at Backlash, it wouldn't have derailed Cena's farewell. It would have made it richer. It would have told the story of how even legends have to reckon with the consequences of their history. But WWE doesn't like subtlety anymore. They like clean conclusions, social media moments, and Hall of Fame packages. Orton winning would have been messy. It would have forced a conversation about where he stands. Instead, they silenced that conversation by having him lose clean. And let's not forget what Cena has become. He's not the same guy who bled for this business week in and week out. He's the crossover star, the late-night talk show guest, the guy who shows up a few times a year for spectacle matches that artificially inflate the pay-per-view cards. And that's fine, he's earned that. But when that part-time persona is allowed to beat someone like Orton, who's still putting in the work week after week, it sends a clear message about how WWE values its pillars versus its icons. Orton may not be a movie star, but he's a wrestling star. He stayed when Cena left. He carried feuds with Edge, Bray Wyatt, Drew McIntyre, and Roman Reigns. He showed up during the Thunderdome era when others were gone. He gave everything, and WWE thanked him by letting him lose in the most forgettable way imaginable. The deeper you look, the more tragic it becomes. Orton spent years developing the most nuanced heel persona in the business, only to now be booked like an aging babyface trying to recapture former glory. WWE has stripped him of his edge, his unpredictability, and most of all, his purpose. The Cena match was symbolic not just of Orton's loss, but of WWE's refusal to invest in anything outside its top PR darlings. If they'd let Orton win, it wouldn't have hurt Cena. In fact, it might have helped Cena's larger story, putting over the man he's tormented for decades in the twilight of his career. But that's not how WE thinks. Cena must win. Cena must smile. Cena must leave as a hero. Orton's just another footnote. It was a calculated execution of legacy erasure, disguised as homage. Randy Orton didn't lose because the story called for it. He lost because WWE no longer sees value in him outside of being a stepping stone for their preferred mythology. And this isn't a new pattern. This has been building for years, just now crystallized in the clearest way imaginable. Orton's 2025 loss to John Cena wasn't just another chapter. It was the final act in a slow, methodical burial of a career that deserved reverence. Not fan service, not part-time spotlight cameos, but sustained, meaningful storytelling. And instead of that, WWE gave Orton the same treatment they gave to countless veterans they no longer knew how to book, silent phasing out. Even in the build-up to the match, there was no attempt to present Orton as a credible threat, no promotional focus on his homecoming, no detailed exploration of his resilience after one of the most brutal injuries in WWE history. Spinal fusion surgery nearly ended his career, yet there was no video package dedicated to that journey, no sit-down interviews, no documentary-level dive into what made this match with Cena emotionally explosive. Everything was filtered through Cena's perspective. Cena this, Cena that. Cena's last run, Cena's championship chase, Cena's farewell tour. Meanwhile, Orton was framed like a relic, a familiar face, someone you remember but don't really think about anymore. They stripped his humanity and turned him into a symbol, a familiar shadow standing next to a brighter light. What hurts even more is how easily the story could have gone the other way. The Orton of old wouldn't have just accepted the circumstances. He would have turned them on their head. He would have ambushed Cena. He would have unleashed cold, calculated chaos. He would have made the crowd unsure of whether to cheer or boo. That's the magic Orton always carried, unpredictability, but WWE didn't want that from him. They wanted him tame, softened, reverent toward Cena's exit. They wanted him grateful to share the stage. But Randy Orton is not some charity case riding the coattails of bigger names. He is the moment. He was the moment. And if WWE had any understanding of nuance, they would have told the story of a man who came back from career-ending injury not for a paycheck, but for revenge, for validation, for the one opponent who always haunted wanted him. It's a disgrace, and it didn't need to be. Orton still has time, he still has the ability, but what he doesn't have anymore is faith from creative, from management, and increasingly from a fan base that sees the writing on the wall. Unless something changes drastically, Backlash 2025 will be remembered not as the celebration of a rivalry, but as the moment WWE officially gave up on Randy Orton. They didn't just ruin his character, they ruined the legacy he's tried so hard to protect, and they did it with a smile, a merch drop, and one last attitude adjustment.